And here I am, all by myself, talking to myself. That's chaos theory.
We can hear you, you know.
I know. I'm trying to entertain myself while staring at my dev.
What?
Can't hear me that well.
Whoa, no. That's a landmine glitch. Stop. Look, down, right there.
That's clearly a hubcap, Josh.
It's a fucking landmine. If you walk on that, you will explode.
It's a hubcap.
Wait, where'd you go? Oh, that's a turret glitch! Glitch, are you dead? Is he dead?
I don't know. I can't check. All I'm hearing is the cartoon noises from the next room over. I can't look. Oh, I gotta move. Oh, Josh, we got a problem. Josh, we got a problem. Lethal Company seems to be one of last year's big runaway indie success stories. It's managed to gain popularity, at least in part, because of how many hilarious clips it ends up generating.
Gwen is staying with the ship. I got...
Oh!
So it sounds like I didn't miss much while I was dropping off my gift.
I've got Josh's body. I'm gonna go take it back. I stepped on a wood. For those who haven't heard about it, it's a cooperative multiplayer game that was released in October of last year. Up to 4 players take on the role of space salvagers, working for the company. They have 3 days to collect a certain quota of scrap metal by landing on desolate moons, making their way into the abandoned bases thereon, and collecting items of value to bring back to their ship, and ultimately, their boss.
You should have been the one who died.
If they manage to meet quota, they get paid with money that they can spend on various items, and then start again with a higher quota. If they fail to meet quota, well...
As you have not met the profit quota, your performance has been deemed below standard. Welcome to our disciplinary process.
The catch is that these bases, and the moons thereon, are infested with all manner of monsters and other dangers just waiting to claim you and your friends. The core of what makes the game work is its shockingly good blend of horror and comedy. Like, Lethal Company is a scary game. You'll be exploring dark hallways with monsters pursuing you around every corner. You will feel lost and alone, unsure if the rest of your crew is alive or dead. And you will, eventually, round a corner to a heart-stopping encounter with a thumper, or hear the chimes of a jester cranking its jack-in-the-box, or unexpectedly be pounced by a snare flea.
It's to your left. No, something small coming towards you as well.
Ah! But the good news is that if your friends are dead, they're spectating and laughing as you flail about in the dark. And when the round's over, you can all laugh about who got offed by what monster, or who missed what jump, or how incredible it is that that one person managed to make it back to the ship and save the salvage, just missing the monster by this much. It's one of those games where everyone walks away with a story to tell or a memorable encounter to share, whether that's regaling crewmates back on the ship once everyone's alive again, or posting clips to social media.
Wait a second, where were you, Gwen? How did you die?
Drowned?
Gwen drowned with me.
On the way there.
Yeah, we only Chris made
you
it
guys
in,
went right.
aside from you.
Part of the way the game generates these hilarious stories you just need to tell one another is by limiting players' access to information, resulting in funny decision-making or misunderstandings of the same events. For example, it's often wise to have someone stay behind in the ship entirely. First, because if everyone dies, you lose all of your salvage collected so far, so you want someone to make it out alive. But also because you can monitor players from a terminal, and use the walkie-talkie to direct them towards salvage or away from dangers. Staying in the ship lets you open doors and disable turrets, and even teleport you back into the ship if you're in a bind, and have purchased a teleporter. But being the man in the chair is actually kind of a clunky and cumbersome experience. You can only watch one player at a time, situations change quickly, and sometimes panicked advice from you is worse than no advice at all. And this division of labor can generate humorous stories from 2 different perspectives, the person in the chair and the person in the field. Alright, Gwen, it's behind you. Gwen is terrified of whatever it is. Gwen is noping out. Gwen missed the jump. Alright. Time to go. Another way the game limits information is by leaning hard on positional audio. You're not really supposed to play this game with a Discord chat going. You can hear your companions when they're close to you, but they taper off as they move away, leaving you isolated and alone. I'm gonna go get VO, hold on. I'm responsible. If you don't have a walkie-talkie with some charge on it, there's no real way to know whether they're alive or dead. You might be having a conversation with a friend when suddenly they stop responding. Did you just wander a little bit too far out of range? Did they try to make a jump and just fall? Or were they nabbed by a bracken? Speaking of brackens, the Rogues Gallery in Lethal Company is also part of why sharing stories in this game is so interesting. Because it's not like playing a Call of Duty game where if you die, your teammates can broadly infer what happened. It's a war game. Figure it out. Monsters in Lethal Company are heavily inspired by internet folklore like Secure, Contain, Protect, or SCP, a sort of communal creepypasta where each entry is a short story about a paranormal entity or object that has bespoke rules or behaviors. As such, Lethal Company's monsters vary wildly both in terms of the danger they represent and in terms of the mistakes you could make that could lead to them killing you. For example, loot bugs are mostly harmless, going along and collecting items and bringing them back to their little nest. Unless, of course, you try to steal from them. Coilheads are loosely based on SCP-173 and need to be kept in eyesight lest they lunge at you extremely quickly. Brackens are quiet monsters peering at you from the shadows that will snap your neck in a heartbeat. But they're also just shy little guys, so if you just look at them briefly, they'll get anxious and back away. But don't stare them down. Outside, forest guardians are terrifying but rely on line of sight. Meanwhile, eyeless dogs patrol at night and can't see anything but hear everything you do, so keep quiet and turn the damned radio off. And that's not even all the various things that can kill you, from landmines and sentries to quicksand and lightning. So when your friends suddenly stop responding, it's not just that you don't know if they're alive or dead, you don't know what got them, and you don't know what's waiting for you in those dark halls. And finding out how they died, or what mistakes they made, or their stories of escaping impossible odds, is all part of the fun. And Lethal Company has been pushed to great success on the backs of all the laughs and stories and clips it's generated. It's sitting around 200,000 Steam reviews as I write this, which puts it conservatively at 1.5 to 2 million units sold. Given Lethal Company's success, both financially and as a horror comedy game, I went looking for where this game came from, since it kind of felt like it just dropped out of nowhere. I expected to find a small team of devs, maybe ex-industry folks working on the game as a side project, or an indie collective that had produced a boomer shooter. Instead, what I found was Zeekerss, a solo game dev who is only 21 years old, but has been developing games for almost a decade at this point. Which actually kind of presents a problem. When I do videos on these solo developers like this, I like to talk about their gamography and show the progression of how we got to their current title. See Kitty Horror Show and Anatomy, or Christoph Frey and the Space Between. But Zeekerss being 21 with 10 years of history means needing to draw the line somewhere, because he started making Roblox experiences as early as 2014 when he was 12 years old, which makes a thorough retrospective kind of awkward, because I didn't get into game criticism to talk about the hobby craft of 12-year-olds, and I mean, I don't like people looking at my early Errant Signal videos because they're not representative of me finding my voice, and I did those in my mid to late 20s. I can't imagine a Roblox game you made before you were a teenager being viewed as your early work as a developer. So I'm not going to cover them except to say that they exist in whatever version of functionality they have, given Roblox's propensity for changing, and that a lot of his influences are already apparent. A fascination with internet-based horror like SCPs and liminal spaces, an interest in playing with different camera perspectives, and a willingness to toy with his players and their expectations. But let's flash forward to 2020, because we get our first retail release from Zeekerss in the middle of the pandemic. It Steals. I think Zeekerss' own description of the game might put it best. It started as an idea one morning in the beginning of quarantine, as I thought about all the horror games I've seen where monsters act predictably, usually making a straight line to the player. I started thinking about what kinds of things an enemy can do to keep the player on their toes. As that implies, It Steals is, essentially, 5 different horror game monster prototypes played sequentially. Your goal is to collect a certain number of glowing pellets while avoiding death by playing by whatever rule system drives the current monster's behavior. And they do feel like prototypes. Each encounter is relatively short and can be beaten in less than 10 minutes, and they all take place in corridors lined with the same checkerboard pattern on the walls, floor, and ceiling. But despite feeling like a series of proof of concepts, I think there's a lot here Lethal Company fans would be interested in. There's Classic Mode, where the monster will run away if you look at them, unless they enter a rage state, much like a Bracken. There's Shutter Mode, where the whole map is dark and you need to use the flash of a camera, both to navigate and to scare the monster away, but you have limited batteries. And then there's my favorite, Hide and Seek Mode, where you wander around collecting orbs while the monster tries to hide from you, but if you get too close or look directly at it, then it's their turn to be it and hunt you for the remainder of the game. This creates a wonderful sense of paranoia that feels like exploring the moons in Lethal Company. It's really cool to see a monster come out of the corner of your view and realize, nope, not going that way till it moves. And it's also great to round a corner and get terrified by running into it unexpectedly. Then there's the Living Halls mode, where certain columns are actually monsters and will eat you if you get too close or stop looking at them, and every 120 seconds you need to find a security vault as the monsters will go wild. And rounding out the list is the Phantom, a mode where a poltergeist tries to hunt you down. It can't see you and you can't see it, but you can hear each other as you knock around the various debris on the map. As long as it's still invisible, it can pass right through you if you hold your breath, but once it materializes, you need to run to a device that you've hopefully placed earlier because it takes a bit to charge, and flash it back into the ether. What's shocking to me is that this feels like a very early version of a lot of what would become Lethal Company, exploring samey, difficult to navigate, sparsely decorated, procedurally generated dark corridors in pursuit of collectible MacGuffins, while monsters that have very different rule sets hunt you down is essentially Lethal Company. I mean, there's a hard-to-read radar that provides only limited utility about direction. A lot of the monsters' rules feel like rough passes at what would later be in Lethal Company, and there's even a scripted power outage that feels like when your friends pull the power apparatus out in Lethal Company without telling you.
I thought we were gonna go to Key Place.
Now put it back in.
Hey, what's up, guys?
And the game wants you to figure out the rules of its various monsters yourself, and it only provides hints as to what to do after 2 deaths, which leads to one of the game's loading screens being, failure is part of the experience, which again, very Lethal Company. In a lot of ways, this little experiment feels like the pre-production of what would become Lethal Company. Other than multiplayer stuff, the DNA is all there, as is the model for Lethal Company's radar booster. Which brings up another fun point. As a solo dev, Zeekerss does a lot of asset reuse, and it's fun to track where the models seem like they show up across multiple games, and I'll try to point some out as we go. Tone-wise, there is horror comedy stuff here, but it's not really the focus. It feels like a horror game made by a playful developer who likes to mess with his audience, but it doesn't feel like there's a ton of laughs, just gotchas. Except for when you beat Shutter Mode, that is objectively pretty hilarious. It Steals was followed up by Dead Cedar, released in April of 2021. Where It Steals is sort of a package of prototype levels made during lockdown, Dead Cedar is a video game proper, a 2-hour-long, story-driven, fixed-perspective third-person horror game. What's interesting is that it's so fundamentally different from It Steals, where that game was basically a non-narrative, formalist experiment in monster mechanic design. Dead Cedar is a much more straightforward genre title. The structure is super rigid. You find a key to open a door, to find a key to open a door, to find a key to open a door, and the game will tell you exactly where you need to go next. But Zeekerss uses that rigid linearity to experiment with setting up some more bespoke monster interactions than the procedurally generated ones from It Steals. There are some really good gotchas here, and it's basically a game built around doing the dog bursting through the window jump scare from Resident Evil as much as possible. Dead Cedar also stands out in Zeekerss' gameography because it's one of the few that seems to have difficulty hitting that horror comedy tone evenly throughout the game. Basically, the game's narrative is extremely self-serious. It's a story about murder and suppressed guilt and mental illness, with big twists over its 2-hour playtime. But the encounter design does the typical Zeekerss thing of messing with players in ways that make you go, oh, for fuck's sake, that border on the comedic. And unlike It Steals, we now have death animations which are undeniably funny? There's something about their low-fidelity, overly fast animation speed and exaggerated movements that combine to make them really humorous. I'm trying to be careful here because it's easy for this to come off like I'm saying, the art is so bad the game is funny, but I'm really not. The art is low fidelity, like a lot of games made on a budget, and the art feels rough-hewn by a young developer still learning his craft. But there's a sense of hyperactivity to the way things move, a sense of jerky impatience to their actual animations that feel designed to elicit laughs. I'm reminded of Colin's bear animation. A low-poly bear dances to a song from Earthbound, and the animation is a bunch of simple poses and movements, but it's hilarious, which was the point. And these cartoony, way too fast animations are kept by Zeekerss as he moves towards overt comedy games, so whether they were intentionally meant this way or not, he clearly saw the value they provided. And the comedy of those little animations is amplified by the mouse-based tank controls. The game does all this intentionally. About halfway through the game you get a mining hat that lets you point a directional light, but some enemies attack upon being hit by bright light, so you need to be very careful about where you point it as you explore. But that precision during quiet, tense moments gets tossed out the door when a giant mummified corpse is hunting you down, and there is something innately comedic about an avatar using mouse-based tank controls flailing to find the doorway in a dark, fixed-camera third-person room as footsteps pound harder and louder and panic sets in just to get a 250 millisecond neck break animation as an anticlimax. It's a game that wants to be serious, but it can't help but be funny. However, because of the design of the title, there's a willingness here to let quiet moments breathe more than in It Steals. It Steals had tension that would wax and wane as the monster got nearer or farther away, but it was always there. There was always a monster hunting you. Here, though, there are genuinely quiet, contemplative moments. Something scary could happen at any minute, but sometimes you're just alone in a dark hallway with your thoughts. It makes that rapid rise in tension much more shocking when you're going from 0 to 100 rather than going from 50 to 100, and I think both the horror and the comedy land better with those sorts of punchy beats. And hey, look what shows up towards the end of the game. Finally, there's the last game Zeekerss released before Lethal Company, the Upturned. It's an action platformer where you play as a recently deceased individual who finds themselves in the Upturned Inn, a hotel for the dead. You meet Ick, a childish and obnoxious but enthusiastic owner and concierge of the Upturned Inn who offers you a room up on floor 1434. You just need to take the elevator up to your luxurious new digs. Unfortunately, the elevator has a habit of stopping every few dozen floors due to faulty wiring, constantly resulting in blown fuses, and you'll need to find a replacement fuse on whatever floor you happen to be on. The game is an action platformer, for lack of a better way of describing it. Here's how Zeekerss puts it, which again, feels apt. Your defining traits are hopping and chucking furniture, you get to chuck furniture at birds, you get to chuck birds at birds. And yeah, you're a little guy who throws physics objects around, sometimes to make platforms, sometimes to trigger switches, and sometimes to fight off grumpy denizens of the hotel. It's a platforming game that has the occasional combat arena. And yes, you can throw the bodies of defeated birds at other birds, and it is great every time. And there's a few things to note here, I think. First is the way the game inverts the horror-comedy ratio from Dead Cedar. The Upturned is undeniably a comedy game first and foremost. Ick is framed as a clown that will interrupt you at the worst possible moments to do annoying things, like play his new song with maximum bass, shaking up the items you're platforming on to avoid an evil eel. Or, just as a rampaging worm monster swallows you whole, he reaches out for a friendship test. There's a sort of ain't I a stinker attitude that's never really mean, but you do get the sense that Zeekerss really enjoys tricking you. I mean, the game opens by asking you for your name, then auto-submits after just a few characters. Twice. Meanwhile, the levels have a whimsy and absurdism to them. One floor in this hotel is a mall, one is an arcade, and one is a mock Old West town. There's even an Akira-style vault that holds one of the most terrifying monsters ever conceived. Shrimp! Ain't he cute? Even the enemies that attack you have a softer, more rounded design. But while there's an emphasis on comedy, the game does have creepy bits and jump scares. They're used to surprise you and keep you off guard, or even make you laugh at the absurdity of gotten tricked. Here Zeekerss is messing with horror comedy in a way that finally feels fully intentional and melded together in a way that is tonally consistent. It's not a scary game with the occasional punch of slapstick or gallows humor, it's a legitimately funny, scary game. It's also further evidence of Zeekerss' growing capability and confidence as a developer. Its Steals was a collection of prototype-y levels, and Dead Cedar was around 2 hours long, walking back and forth around one house. But the Upturned is a full 30 levels plus bonus unlockable levels that tell a cohesive story over 4 or 5 hours, and are paced such that they regularly introduce new ideas and mechanics. It is a shockingly complete and polished title for a game made alone by someone who wasn't even old enough to drink at the time of its development. As far as asset reuse goes, there's actually a fair bit from both past and future games here. The vault doors from It Steals are what keep Shrimp locked up, and the entire stairway to the basement from Dead Cedar shows up, going into Shrimp's cave. As far as content that reappears in Lethal Company goes, there's a bunch. The red crates that hold the bottles, the toy robots, the jars that will eventually hold pickles. And hey, the pajama guy who chases you through some of the levels, he shows up as a plush you can buy to decorate your ship with in Lethal Company. But perhaps most interesting are the animations for the player character itself, which I can't confirm are the same, but they certainly look similar. You know, carrying things with your arms outstretched, the really fast, pointed little toe movements. The player character even does most of the Lethal Company dance as an idle animation. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Which brings us back to Lethal Company itself. Walking through Zeekerss' gamography, I think it really helps one understand where the game's distinct horror comedy vibe comes from. In aggregate, they reveal an impishness to Zeekerss' creative sensibility. His games are, in a lot of ways, systems of delivering a series of practical jokes on the player. Whether the payoff is scary or comedic, the structure is the same. Keep players on their toes and let them never know what's coming next so that you can surprise them from a totally different direction. But Lethal Company takes this even further, and Zeekerss encourages his players to prank each other. Items like the masks that are worth salvage money but can possess their holder make all friends potential enemies. You can screw with the person in the chair from afar with the remote control that can flicker your ship's power even while you're inside the base. And speaking of playing with the lights, you can also rearrange furniture on the ship, including hiding the light switch. Or just boxing players in when they go to the bathroom in between rounds. Even just the clown horns and whoopee cushions reinforce this attitude that everyone playing Lethal Company gets to mess with everyone else. Lethal Company is an engine for generating and then having players unknowingly fall into traps, and it turns out that structure lends itself really well to being both funny and scary, which are Zeekerss' specialties.
Gwen is inverse teleporting.
Oh shit! Jesus!
And that's really the core of all of these viral videos and all of the stories that players tell one another. They're all someone being made a fool of by one mousetrap or another. The trick is that these ambushes never feel mean or contemptuous, because the person who is the biggest fool tends to be the person who walks away with the funniest story to tell.
I want to see if you can kill it with the shovel.
Ah!